S.A. Cosby, or Sean, as his mom calls him, is an Anthony Award-winning writer from southeastern Virginia, the author of the New York Times bestseller Razorblade Tears, which topped multiple best lists including Time, New York Times, NPR, The Strand, and PBS Masterpiece Mystery. He is also the author of Blacktop Wasteland, which won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, was a New York Times notable book, and was named a Best Book of the Year by NPR, The Guardian, and Library Journal, among others. These two books turned me into a crime thriller fan, and definitely an S.A. Cosby fan. I didn't even know I liked the genre until I read these books. I devoured them both in less than a week, and I can't wait to read more from Sean. Both Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland have been an option for movies, and while I'll be the first in line for tickets, I think that the film industry is going to struggle. They'll have their work cut out for them in telling Cosby stories with the same color and fervor that he writes them. In addition to these two books and the countless short stories he's published, Cosby's debut 2019 novel, My Darkest Prayer, is being republished in a new edition that will be available December 6th. Cosby's writing is inspired in part by his childhood, growing up poor in the rural South with all its stains and glory, where he lived in a trailer behind a popular nightclub that no doubt aided in creating the imaginative and dangerous characters he introduces to us to his books.
They're just all my cousins.
He finds a way to connect us to the worst parts of people like Buddy Lee and still see their humanity and find compassion for their circumstances. There are also the times when I yelled at those characters as well. If you've read the books, you might remember the references to chocolate Tasty Freeze milkshakes. I wish we all had one right now. I'm looking forward to hearing more from him today, and I know all of you are as well, so I will stop talking and introduce Cheryl Head, who will be moderating today's panel. Cheryl is the author of the Charlie Mack Motown Mystery Series, and she will be our moderator today. Thank you all again for being here, and don't forget to buy a book, and please stay hydrated and happy. Thank you.
So this is an exciting time for me. You know, Sean is just blown up in the mystery and crime thriller landscape. Before we start, one housekeeping note. Emily loaned us her Razorblade Tears copy so we would have one for display. And make sure we give it back to Emily after this. Sean, good to see you, man. I mean, it's
good
been
to see you.
3.5 years, I guess.
My God.
You know,
I feel like we're all trapped in like a bad version of a Albert Camus book.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. I'm going to say a couple things that are a little bit redundant to the introduction you just heard because big success deserves repetition. So Sean's been called one of the leading crime fiction voices of his generation, been compared to Walter Mosley, George Pelecanos, Dennis Lehane. His books have been praised by the likes of Stephen King and Dennis and Lee Child and Laura Lippman. He's a Southern man with Southern roots who writes Southern noir. His first book, Blacktop Wasteland, won the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, was a New York Times notable book, was one of NPR's best books of 2020, and he won a slew of other awards and accolades for that book, including the Anthony Award for Best Novel. Sean followed the success of that book with another book. That's hard to do, folks, you know, to write two back-to-back big hits. And that breakout novel with a bold new book called Razorblade Tears. I remember when I read it the first time, I thought, this is going to be a breakout book on a lot of different levels because it tackles so many things and does it so well. One of the things I want to start off with is just to give you a little surprise, get your juices going. I think you're like the king of simile in your books. You lay language on the page. I got one for you. Tell me how good it is.
Okay.
You lay language on the page like pellets coming out of a sawed-off shotgun.
That's good.
No,
I'm going to steal that. I'm I'm gonna use that in the one I'm working on now. I think I love similes. I love the way language sounds. My editor is concerned that I'm addicted to similes. So for all the ones you see in the book, there's about 60 or 75 that got cut. So
Where they're also good and so vivid, and if you're getting, you're hitting 90% of the time, you're hitting. So I've looked at almost every interview you've done in the last 2 years. So he was on my playlist for 2 weeks. You're an early reader, you say in your interviews, a voracious reader, and you read very broadly, partly because your mom and your aunt would bring books into the house. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Well, my mom liked to read biographies and Greek mythology and historical novels. My aunt read like Stephen King and Clive Barker, and then my uncle read all these like horrible, bloody Mickey Spillane novels and early John D. MacDonald novels and stuff like that. And so, growing up poor, we didn't have cable. Like we had three channels, and then like, I was the youngest, so I always had to go outside and turn the antenna. So you got to holler through the window, "What's happening now?" And so I kind of fell into reading books because we didn't have a lot of entertainment options, and I read what my mom and my aunts and my uncles brought in, but I also read. My mom used to love yard sales. I hated yard sales. Hated them. I was like, why are we buying other people's junk? And but at these yard sales, you could go buy 10 paperback novels for like $1.
Right.
And so I'd read everything from Agatha Christie to Dorothy L. Sayers to, James A. Michener, who has a 10 around the corner. And so that kind of gave me my background in what I like to read. And also, I kind of think later on, it kind of developed my style. And so it was just something that I fell into at an early age. And even now, I try to read 3 to 4 books a month if I can. Kindles make it easier so I can see better.
Yeah,
so, But reading is, I wouldn't be a writer if I hadn't been such a voracious reader.
Yeah, when we talk about an early reader, so what age you're talking?
I read my first Stephen King novel when I was 7 years old. And then I slept with a knife under my pillow for like 4 weeks. I read Salem's Lot when I was 7.
Oh, no.
And then I went downstairs. I remember I grabbed my grandma. She had like 4 silver utensils that were real silver, and I had all of them under my pillow to protect me, which I got my lore wrong because silver doesn't really hurt vampires. It's for werewolves. But I had such a vivid imagination that when I read books like that, I'd had these just intense dreams. And so my mom was like, you got to start reading these books. I can't stand you hollering in the middle of the night. That Kurt Baller was coming through the window. And so, but I just love those kind of books. And I moved on to Clive Barker books. I started reading like a lot of early noir stuff, like Raymond Chandler and Chester Himes. I read those when I was like 12 or 13. So I just my mom used to say I was talking when I was 4. And I was reading when I was 4.5. I don't believe that. I think that's like a family urban legend, but I do remember reading really early. I remember going to school and being in kindergarten and the teacher trying to teach us and I remember reading that sentence that she had on the board.
Wow.
And I remember there was a kid next to me that was really mad about that. So.
Yeah. What about a library? Did you have access to a library?
Yeah, libraries were also huge again because we were dirt floor poor. We really were. I remember my first 3-piece suit. My cousin wore the vest, my brother wore the coat, and I wore the pants. And so we couldn't afford to buy books, so we'd go to the library. And I used to ride my bicycle to the library like on Saturdays, and the library was open from 8 to 1, and I stayed there all day.
Wow.
And in the library, and like she got to know me, so then she would start introducing me to books, and she introduced me to like Sartre and stuff I wasn't really that anxious to read, but I'm glad she did. So she was a huge influence in my life too.
It's good, even growing up in a rural setting, that you had access to a library.
Yeah, it was a long way to get there though. The library was 17 miles from our house.
Okay.
So yeah, when I had young legs, I could ride that down there and back.
Yeah. Did you guys have like the bookmobile? Did that ever come
we
by?
had the bookmobile that came to the school. We had the reading is fundamental.
Yeah, that's right.
So you go in there with $10 and you feel like you're like a king. Like, give me all the three investigators. So
that's great. I noticed in reading I read 3 of your books, My Darkest Prayer and the last 2, but both Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland have strong elements of family in them. And a lot of time, classic noir doesn't necessarily have that, the Chandlers and the Spillane. So tell me about why you put family, and will that always be front and center in the kind of noir you write?
I think after writing Darkest Prayer, where I did sort of an homage to those lone wolf sort of characters, where with Darkest Prayer, the main character, Nathan Waymaker, his parents are dead. He doesn't have a lot of family. He has one cousin who runs a funeral home, and he lives at a funeral home. He works there. But I think for me, when I started writing Blacktop, I wanted to sort of write about it. I wanted Bug, the main character, Blacktop, to be sort of the antithesis of like Parker. Like I want him to be tough like Parker and formidable, but I wanted him to have a background. I wanted the family life to inform his outlaw life, and a lot of what he does is because of that. And doing that, it worked. I thought it worked really well. So when it was time to write Razorblade, I sort of just upped the ante. Even though the main characters in Razorblade, Ike and Buddy Lee, lose their sons, they're devastated by how they lost the opportunity to be close to them.
Absolutely.
And like with Ike, he has a wife, and Buddy Lee doesn't have he has a lot of family, but they don't make an appearance that often in the book. But he has friends that care about him, and so this idea of this network of people that care about you, I think, for a very, very base way, it ups the stakes. Because if you're a bad man or you're a hard man, and you have family, you have weaknesses, and so that helps to turn up the heat a little bit. But also, I think it gives the characters not only does it give them a weakness, but it gives them a strength because it gives them something to fight for. And so going forward, the book I'm working on now has a lot of family elements.
I'm going to ask you about that later. About that book. So Razorblade is blowing up. I like the buddy part of the book too. The family elements are really strong. There's a lot of violence in it.
Yeah, a little bit. I think I've been asked this question a lot. I never try to make the violence gratuitous. I always make the violence in my book have consequences. Growing up, and like I said, I read a lot of those early noirs. A lot of those guys get beat up, knocked around, and they just didn't get up and dust themselves off and keep going. I've been punched in the face before. That hurts. You don't just shake that off. And so I wanted my characters, the violence in that book, to carry over. That it means something to them, physically, but also emotionally. It weighs on them. It weighs on their conscience, even though they think it won't. Like with Buddy Lee and Ike, their sons have been murdered, and so if anybody has a motive to go out and hurt people, it's these two guys. But even that, still, it weighs on them. It makes them think about the consequences of their actions. And I always want the violence in my books to be real. But I think Razorblade is more violent than Blacktop because Razorblade is more personal in the motivation than Blacktop. Blacktop, a lot of what happens to Bug, he brings on himself. It's his own hubris. Like a friend of ours, Kelly Garrett, said when she first read the first draft, she's like, if he listened to his wife and sell that car, the book be over in 10 pages. and so, he doesn't. Where with Razorblade, I don't have any children, but I have a niece that I'm very close to, and I can't think of anything worse than somebody hurting her.
Right.
I could definitely see myself putting somebody in a wood chipper if they put their hands on her. And so, what's funny about that scene? People always tell me, "Oh my God, I had to close my eyes. I couldn't read that." You never see them go in the wood chipper.
Right.
You see he says he has one.
Right.
And then in the next scene, he's cleaning out with a water hose.
Amen.
It's like the hook scene in Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It doesn't really happen, but people
or the psycho scene in
yeah.
You don't see him.
But people have built up in their mind that it happens. So I guess that's a compliment.
That is.
But I think again, the loss of their sons. These are men of violence, and they don't know how to communicate otherwise. As the book goes on, they learn. But in the beginning, these are guys that you don't want to cross because the only way they know how to express themselves is through putting their hands on somebody. And I grew up, I made a joke earlier, but I grew up with a lot of guys like that weren't given the communication skills that they need, and so they make poor choices based on that. And so I wanted to write a book that sort of spoke to that and spoke to those characters.
But each of those characters have such intellect, their own set of intellectualism, and we get to be in their inner life a lot, which I like in the book. And we do see their progression from these men who are being totally reactive to being very reflective at the end. I love that trajectory.
Yeah, I wanted everything in that book. I think for me, crime fiction is the best genre to examine the interior life of your characters, because for me, crime fiction is it's the gospel of the dispossessed, and crime fiction is about desperation. You're desperate. You need money. You're desperate for revenge. You're desperate to escape, and I think it is the best way to articulate those ideas. And so I do spend a lot of times in my character's head because I want you to care about them, So when I put them through hell, it means something to you. You know, a friend of mine named Ed Kurtz said the best writing is when you take your characters, you put them in a tree, and then you throw rocks at them all day long. And so if I want you to care about me throwing rocks at them. And with Ike and Buddy Lee, you know, they start out pretty rough around the edges, but by the end of the book, you know, there's a scene in in Razorblade where Buddy Lee makes a joke. He's done something and he's run up in somebody's house with a truck.
Right.
And Ike tells him, he said, "Did you really drive your truck in there?" He said, "Yeah, but I made a wrong turn at the sink and I got lost." And they laugh together. And it's the first time they really share a laugh.
Yeah.
And by that time, it's like, you know, I remember writing, I was like, this is the scene where they really care about each other.
Where they bond.
So now I'm really going to turn it up.
Yeah. That was a good scene.
Thank you.
All your action scenes are superb. I mean, they're quick. They're, you know, the pacing is really strong. The words get shorter and more dynamic, I think.
I do that on purpose. I try to use a staccato style when they're having fights or action because, again, I grew up behind a bar. I've been in more than one bar fight. That's how action happens. Bar fights are really quick. Yeah. I love, like, Jason Bourne movies and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love them
But
too.
real fights aren't like that.
Yeah.
Real fights are 2 or 3 minutes of guys wrestling that are out of shape. And then maybe somebody gets in a good punch. And then somebody separates, and that's how fights are. Unless there are guys who really know how to fight, and then they're even shorter.
Okay.
So
nobody's rolling up a magazine and going, no, that doesn't happen in real life.
Somebody might throw a beer bottle at you, but usually they're drunk, so they miss.
Yeah.
But although I used to be a bouncer, and guys' fights are usually 2 or 3 minutes of talking about fighting.
First.
Yeah. Women just go at it. There's no conversation. Guys have to give you like their whole. It's like they're in Game of Thrones, you know. I'm Tyrone, first of my name, and all that. Every woman fight I ever saw was like immediate. It's like, that's that bitch over there. And so I kind of work that into the action scenes too.
That's lovely. That's lovely. So a plot point in Razorblades is that your two protagonists, Ike and Buddy Lee, have gay sons who are married to each other. Buddy Lee's white, and Isaiah is black. And as a cis straight man, how did you come to write it so authentically with such empathy and with all the right language, I think? I'm a queer woman, so I can say you wrote it very authentically.
Thank you so much. So the inspiration for Razorblade Tears comes from 2 points. One is humorous, one is kind of serious. So the humorous point is there's a guy named Ty Robinson who's a good friend of mine. He used to publish a magazine called Thug Lit.
Yes.
And he's about the same age as I am. That's funny, huh? And he entered himself in a boxing contest.
Wow.
And in a Golden Gloves contest. He won, but he was talking to me later. He's like, I'm in so much pain. We were talking about being men of a certain age who, you know, we used to get into our share of trouble and rumbles and stuff. And I said, you know, I haven't been in a fight in like 7 years, which is good. I can't imagine like being in one now. It had to be someone like trying to murder me right now. And so we were talking about getting older and looking at how you look at your past versus your present and your future when you have more, you know, yesterdays and tomorrow. And you know, how do you reconcile growing up a certain way? You know, because I grew up with men who were hyper masculine, who were hyper aggressive because they felt like they had to be, especially when you were growing up in an African American environment. A lot of my uncles and cousins, they went through life where they weren't treated with respect. They weren't treated as men. And so they defended their masculinity vociferously, you know? And so it took me a while to unlearn that. And so when I was talking to Todd about that, he said, yeah, man, he's like, I don't think I ever want to be in a boxing ring again. And so I was talking about being men of a certain age and sort of a history of violence and how do you move past that? And so we kind of laughed about that. You know, I remember him saying, I got to go get a Zorbine Senior because Junior ain't going to cut it. But then a more serious thing, I have a relative who's a gay man, and we, you know, all of us, my father had 11 brothers and sisters, so I have 63 cousins.
Wow.
And so we all know each other. We're all very close. And so, you know, growing up, we all knew my cousin was gay. It was never a big deal with us, but he never told my aunt and uncle. And so about 5 years ago, he decided to tell him. He came up from Atlanta, and it didn't go very well. And he was very upset about it. And so later, me and my brother took him out for a beer. And we were talking, and he said something that struck me like a hammer. He said, you know, maybe I should have just kept it to myself. And I remember sitting there, and I was a really wild kid, you know, and I put my mom through a lot, but I never felt like she didn't love me. And I couldn't imagine what it feels like to not be loved unconditionally by people who are supposed to love you unconditionally. And so that combined with just this idea in the black community, in many parts of the black community, there's this rampant homophobia. And I think there's a lot of reasons for it. And I think one of the reasons is what I said earlier. A lot of black men don't feel respected. Yeah. They feel emasculated. But also I think there's a sense of... Sometimes I think people are in a race to see who's more oppressed. And I think sometimes that can color the way you view other people. And so I wanted to talk about those things. And so I kind of combined this idea of men of a certain age dealing with their regrets, but also the idea of the intolerance for LGBTQ plus people in the South especially. You know, my cousin said this also during that night. He said, you know, if I could do hair or I could play a piano, nobody would care. Nope. You know, and they would let that go. And that's how I was raised like that. Yep. Because I know our choir director in my church.
It's the trope and stereotype.
Yeah,
that's true.
Exactly. Right, yeah. You know, he was incredibly gay. You know, his partner was his lead singer. He always got to sing lead soprano. And so, you know, everybody kind of just ignored that because he had a talent. And I thought that was also something I wanted to talk about. So that's where Razorblade Tears came from. The empathetic part of it is growing up, as I got older, as I unlearned a lot of those tragic and toxic masculinity tropes that I was raised with, I have friends who are gay. I have family members who are gay. You know, one of my good friends is a guy named PJ Vernon. Yeah. I love PJ, you know. And
great guy.
And so I just wanted, as a straight male, I wanted to talk about that as honestly and openly as I could. So there is harsh language in the beginning of the book. Buddy Lee and Ike are talking in a harsh way. But as the book goes on, as they realize how much they've missed out in the lives of their sons and how much maybe they have a second chance with their son's daughter, they understand the error of their ways. Because I think the biggest complaint that I get from people is, I don't want to root for these two homophobic characters. And I understand that, but I don't think anybody is beyond redemption. The thing is, redemption is not a gift that somebody gives you. Redemption is something you have to earn. It's like putting together a jigsaw puzzle that nobody else is ever going to see. You have to do it for you. And I think too many people don't understand that. And I wanted to hammer that home with Ike and Buddy Lee, that even though they are trying to redeem themselves, that doesn't mean that everybody they've hurt has to forgive them. It just means that they're better people for it.
Isn't Sean deep? He's deep. I want to talk a little bit about process. Yeah, that's worth an applause. I mean, want to talk a little bit about process and writing. So you write a lot of short stories, magnificent short stories. You won the Anthony Award for your short stories. You got one that's not anthology and one nominated this year for the Anthony Award. Tell me what you like about that form versus the long form of a novel.
You know, I used to think I couldn't be a novelist because I was so into writing short stories. I love the pow bang boom of short stories. Here's the premise, here's what happened, here's the end. You know, we're all out. You know, tip your bartender and waitresses. And so for me, it's just the immediacy of the plot. Because I have that problem with my novels. I always want to get to the good part. You know, I do a lot of setup. I have to do a lot of setup. You have to do a novel, but I'm itching to get to the fight. I'm itching to get to the novel I'm working on now is a murder mystery. So I'm itching for the cops to find this body that's trussed up like an angel. I want y'all to get to this. But, you know, you've got to build this character up. And so that was sort of hard for me. But a friend of mine gave me a really good piece of advice. It was like, novels are just short stories that are all piled together in a book. And so once I thought of it like that, it became a lot easier for me. And so, but I think the process for short stories is way different than my novels. Like, I'll write a short story in like 30 minutes.
I know. I've seen you do it.
And so it's just not as deep and complex. Whereas with novels, I write long synopsises, whatever the plural of synopsis is, and I write they're very stream of consciousness, and so it's just me like writing. Here's what happened to Bug. Here's what happened to Ike and Buddy Lee. But they're long. They're like I said, they're like anywhere from 4,000 to 8,000 words. And so I use that as a roadmap a lot of times the ending of the synopsis is different than the ending of the novel, but it helps me kind of guide my characters where I want to go. And then I'll write a first draft. I'll send it out to. I'm very lucky to have friends that are writers. Nikki Dolson's a good friend of mine.
She's great.
Friend of mine, Eric Pruitt, and they'll read it and look at it and like let me know what works, what doesn't work, and then I'll take it back. I'll do an edit. Really, I don't really rewrite. I know people that like will trash it and write the whole thing over again.
Right.
I am not doing that. I am too lazy for that. That's the same reason I make up towns, because I hate doing geography.
Oh.
I hate when a copy editor is like, well, Route 17 doesn't run into Route 108. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I made it all up. But then after I do that, I leave it alone for a couple weeks and I go back and read it again. And then once I've done that, now, before I just like try to sell it, but now I have an editor, so then I send it. I send it to her. So, and right now she's had the first. We're doing something different this time. She wanted to see the first 15 chapters, so I sent her the first 15, and she called me like. I sent it like at 10:30 in the morning, and she called me at 12 o'clock, and she's like, I've already cried 3 times. And I'm like,
That's great.
I'm sorry?
Is it true one of your editors said, does everybody have to die at the end?
Yeah. She's like, can't some people survive? And I'm like, everybody gotta go. But I did change that so some people survive.
Yeah.
She thinks I'm bloodthirsty. I'm not, but I do like. I love the Shakespearean ending where, like the Hamlet ending, where nobody makes it out except there's one guy that nobody noticed.
Exactly. I also hear you start with the titles. Is that true?
So Ed McBain, Evan Hunter, he did an interview once, and he said, I always start the 87th Precinct novels with a really pithy title, and then I build out from there. And I was like, oh, that sounds good. I'll do that. Now I'm superstitious about it. So now I always start with a title. But I think for me, it helps focus the story.
You can, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't have the concept even? Wow.
I just think of a really cool title.
Wow.
And like with Razorblade Tears, I stole that from Quentin Tarantino, where I just think of 2, iconic words that don't usually fit together, and I put them together. Like the one I'm working on now, I wanted it to sound sort of biblical. So it's called All the Sinners Bleed. And I wanted it to have this sort of biblical tone, but it doesn't. And once I did that, I'm like, okay, I know where I want to go with it, because it's a book. We'll talk about it later, but I know where I want to go with it. But I love this. I can't do just blank random project. And I know writers that do that. I would still be sitting there looking at the page. I write very visually. So the titles make me see what I'm writing. With Razorblade Tears, I saw this picture in my head, even before I wrote the book, of this guy punching a heavy bag and just crying and trying to hold back the tears. And that was just the image. And for him, it was like, crime was almost like somebody sliced him in his face and it hurt too much. And so that was where the idea came from.
I know both books, Razorblade Tears and Blacktop Wasteland, have already been optioned for motion pictures. And there's been some speculation about who should play the protagonist. I really I heard other people's thoughts, but I liked your thoughts better. I liked Matthew McConaughey and Denzel Washington. I thought, wow, that sounds really cool.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Oh, man, I would love for them to play it. It's just like I wrote, when I wrote Blacktop Wasteland, I had the idea of Michael B. Jordan as Bug.
Yeah.
And I wanted Idris Elba as his father in the flashback.
Oh, yes.
And so, but it's funny, speaking of Matthew McConaughey, I can tell this now because the book's been sold for options.
Okay.
So one day my agent calls me. He's like, hey, somebody wants to talk to you on Zoom, and it's okay if I give him your email. I was like, who is it? He's like, I want you to be surprised. I'm like, okay. He says, you got to be on Zoom. The Zoom call at 2 o'clock. Okay. Click on it. It's like the host will let you in. We've all become experts at Zoom the last 3 years. But it didn't say who the host was. Like, oh, the host will let you in. I click on it. I'm sitting there. Screen pops up. It's Matthew McConaughey.
All right.
Yeah. So he's like, I just want to talk to you because I'm interested in playing Buddy Lee. And I'm like, oh my God, Jesus Christ.
Oh my God, yes.
And he's like, asked me about him. He's like, I know guys like Buddy Lee. I grew up with guys like that. We don't talk for like 5 minutes.
Wow.
So then he's getting ready to leave. And he's like, well, thank you for your time. And I was like, are you going to say the thing? And he's like, what thing? I said, you know the thing. Say the thing. And he was like, all right. So I don't know if he's going to be playing it, but it was like cool that I got to talk to him. That was awesome.
Yeah, that is excellent.
Yeah.
So the last author who was up here, Andy Bartz, said she is totally a pantser, writes up the theater for pants. Are you a combination?
I'm a combination.
Because you have a synopsis.
I do the synopsis. I'm too freeform for an outline. but I'm too scared to be a pantser. It's like, I don't like writing myself in the corners. Like, some people are like, oh man, what are we gonna do now? I hate that, because I hate plot holes. The one thing I'm so proud of is nobody so far, knock on wood, has emailed me with like, well, I don't understand, they shouldn't have known that, or they shouldn't have done that. Because I am dedicated to that. I really am. Because I'm the worst person to go see movies with.
Oh,
my wife is sitting back there and she'll tell you I am the worst.
You always
person.
gonna say he did it.
Yeah. It's like they couldn't have known that. They weren't there. How could they have known that? And it's like, could you just shut up? Jesus Christ.
So I had really laughed out loud when I saw this and some write-up about you, about your writing process. And I'm going to just give you the key words for it, for the audience. It has something to do with recliner, cat, something. You tell us.
So one of my first purchases when I actually started making money from writing was I wanted to get a recliner. I never had one. So I went to the store and I got this recliner, and I got my dad one too.
Nice.
So we both have the same recliner. It's got a cooler and it leans back. It's got a massage thing and a heater and so that's where I write at now.
Oh, nice.
But my cat, we have a cat named Flipper, is obsessed with my laptop. So I have to have to make him sleepy by feeding him a bunch of food, or he'll jump on the laptop and I'll put him down, he'll jump right back up, I'll put him down. And I have to write wearing my hat. Because that's a superstition, because I wrote Blacktop wearing a hat, and it did okay, and then I was wearing a hat when I read Razorblade, so now I have to wear my hat. So I have a lucky hat that I wear.
Good.
I have my recliner. I have my food-drunk cat that has to stay off to the side. And I have my earphones in, because my wife likes to watch movies while I'm writing, and then if I don't have my earphones in, she'll ask me, did you see that? And I'm like, I'm writing. I didn't see anything.
I didn't hear you.
And so, but that's sort of my process. That's where the magic happens.
What's your soundtrack?
Oh, man. So I do this thing where if I'm writing action scenes, I listen to like really intense music, so either hard rock, hard southern rock, hard like real tough hip hop. Mm-hmm. But then if I'm writing more emotional scenes, I'll listen to like, I don't know, Nora Jones or Enya or something like that.
Yeah.
If I'm listening to like the car chase scenes in Blacktop, it was all like Allman Brothers and MOP and Eric B. and Rakim. And so some writers talk about they can't listen to music when I love listening to music. It gets me in the mood, gets me in where I want to be. So yeah.
You can. Your books play out like motion pictures, I think. And you're a big fan of film as well as
movies.
books.
Yeah, I love films. Blacktop Wasteland was inspired by a movie. It was inspired by a movie called Hell or High Water.
Uh-huh.
I remember watching that movie, and I walked out of the theater, and we grew up so poor. My mom was disabled when I was young, when I was born, and she had a stroke during labor, and then her and my dad separated. Our house burned down. It's my childhood is like a bad country song. And we had to move with my grandparents. We didn't have indoor plumbing until I was 16.
Wow.
And so, Hell or High Water, I don't know anybody seen the movie, but the last scene is Chris Pine giving this monologue about poverty. And he says, poverty is like a disease. It's affected everybody I know. My parents before them, And I remember sitting in the movie theater crying, because like, that's what it feels like, Being poor is being afraid of the phone ringing. Because when the phone rings, somebody's sick or somebody's in trouble, and both things cost money that you don't have.
Right. Wow.
And so I came out of there, I said, I want to write a book that's like that, but it's through the eyes of people I know. It's through the eyes of people I grew up with. It's in Virginia. It's set in southeastern Virginia. And so that's where Blacktop Wasteland came from. And so, when I write, I see the scenes in my head.
Okay.
I write very visually.
Yeah.
And so I even use like movie techniques. So if you read Blacktop Wasteland, there's scenes where it's like a close-up on the speedometer.
Yep.
And then there's scenes where I want to pull out and I want you to imagine seeing them on the interstate.
Right.
And so movies are a huge influence on me.
Yeah.
Really, I love film.
Yeah.
I'm a huge cinephile. So
Yeah.
I grew up watching. My grandfather's favorite movie was White Lightning and Gator with Burt Reynolds.
Nice.
So they were the closest movies when I was a kid, the way we lived. So.
Yeah.
Because my grandfather loved his moonshine.
Nice,
So.
nice. We've got about 5 minutes. We're going to open it up for questions. I want to leave a good amount of time for questions, because I know you have some for Sean. Want to talk to you about diversity in literature right now. So the crime fiction and mystery landscape has been relatively a white landscape. Lots of really great stuff, but a lot of white writers, a lot of white male writers. So we got some really fine now white women writers like Louise Penny and others, Sarah Paretsky and others. What do you think your success in that landscape means for the genre altogether?
I hope that whatever success I've had will open up doors for more Southern male writers, Southern black male writers, Southern female writers, Southern LGBTQ plus writers. I rep the South all day long because for me, there's a lot of people that think the South is just the sole province of neo-Confederate apologists, and nothing could be further from the truth. Every scrap of land that a wannabe Confederate walks on waving a Confederate flag, somebody who looks like me has bled and died on.
Right.
You don't own this. This is not just yours.
Right.
You know, I have a church where I've come from that was founded in 1868. My great-great-grandfather founded that church.
Wow.
So how dare you think that this is your heritage? Southern heritage is more than Confederate flags and a 4-year hissy fit by white landowners. And I'll be damned if I let somebody think that's how they're going to represent the South. And so there are writers that are coming up. I hate to say behind me because it makes it sound like, but there are writers that are coming up behind me that I am really trying to push. Jessamine Ward, Eli Craner, you know, people like that that I really love. Yeah. But also outside of the South, there are writers that I am huge fans of that, you know, like I mentioned P.J. Vernon, who's a gay man. Yeah. Kelly Garrett, who's a friend of mine who is a great writer that has done a lot to support me. Nikki Dolson, Yasmin Clinton, who wrote Her Name is Night, a great. So I think there's this idea that diversity is this one-trick pony, you know, that is like, oh, well, let's jump on this diversity bandwagon right now because it's making money. But I think really it's a paradigm shift happening. Yeah. Because I think the worst thing I hate is when a publisher or an editor used to tell me, I can't see myself in this book. Really? Because I had to see myself in Raymond Chandler's books. I had to see myself in Mickey Spillane's book. I had to imagine that I was, you know, Patrick Kinsey, you know, in Dennis Lehane's book. So why can't you imagine that you're Nathan Waymaker? Right. Right. Why is this a one-way street? Yeah. And so I think the fact that more writers of all ilks are coming up, I just think it only helps. If you can, I come from a very small town, very conservative town. Had a guy write a letter to the editor that he read Blacktop Wasteland, and it made him realize that the way he viewed black people was wrong. Wow. You know, which is like, all right, I guess. Thank you. You know, shouldn't have been a book that had to tell you that, but you know, but yeah, if more people feel that way, if more people see that way, it's just like Razorblade Tears. I was in LA for the LA Times Book Festival, and a lady came up to me and she said, you know, I wanted to tell you I read your book, I really loved it, and she said it's a very sad story because she said, you know, my son was gay and we didn't get along, and we had a really bad argument one day. And he jumped in his car, and he ran down the road, and he had a wreck, and he died. And she said, every time I read your book, and I've read it 3 times, I feel like I'm talking to him. And so if Buddy Lee and Ike can change, anybody can change. Absolutely. And so those books are necessary. Yeah. Not me. Don't put me on a pedestal. You know, I made a tweet about that a couple months ago. It was like, if you like Razorblade Tears, then go read PJ's book, read Cheryl's book, you know, read Kelly J. Ford's book, Cottonmouth. Read Razorblade Tears is the story of 2 straight guys learning to deal with something that writers that are LGBTQ have to live with every day. And it can only help, you know. And it's like, and like that guy, if my book helped him, you know, not wave a Confederate flag and not be so racist, then so be it. You know, that's what writing is for. Writing is the art form of telling lies to find the truth. You know, and I think that's what we do. And if you do it really well, people will see the truth in themselves.
I'm going to be promoting you for a TED Talk. Want to ask you what you're writing next. I know you're doing a short story on fratricide. Because you're going to read...
Yeah, I'm going to read that at BouchCon, which is super dark. I wrote so much dark stuff during the pandemic. It was like, oh my God, I got to watch some Disney movies to clean my palate. Like the story that's nominated is dark as hell. It is so dark. Oh my God. There's an Alzheimer's page and somebody gets shot in the face and hit with a cinder block. It's so dark. But the story I'm working on now is called All the Sinners Bleed. Okay, it's a Southern Gothic murder mystery. Basically, it's about the first black sheriff of the small Southern town named Titus Crown. And on the 1-year anniversary of his election, there's a shooting at his school, and a beloved teacher is shot by a former student, and then unfortunately the former student is shot by the police. Titus finds out the student, the teacher, and a third mystery person were involved. They were a trio of serial killers, and he finds 15 bodies buried out in the middle of the woods under a weeping willow tree. And so he decides to try to find out who the third person is, while at the same time there's a far-right group that wants to hold a parade in town to celebrate the Confederate statue. So all that's going on. Titus has this secret. He used to be an FBI agent. He retired suddenly under inauspicious circumstances, so we find out about that. So it's a story about religion, about race. You know, my hometown is 8,000 people. We have 28 churches. And so I wanted to talk about the hypocrisy of Christianity in southern towns. Real quick, Flannery O'Connor has this wonderful quote where she says, "The South is not Christ-centered, but it's Christ-haunted." It's haunted by the hypocrisy of people that think they're acting Christ-like. So that's what the book is sort of about.
That's so interesting.
Yeah,
I love it. We're going to open it up for questions. The way we want to do it is, if you can, walk to the two mics because they want to make sure it gets on the audio system. If not, you can say it from your chair and I'll repeat it. But
Yeah, I think we can hear you.
yeah,
If you don't want to get
if
up.
you want to do that. And you
I
can
just want to know what your if you have a favorite Clive Barker novel.
Oh yeah.
you hear that favorite Clive Barker novel.
The Damnation Game. Yeah. Yeah, which is
That was it?
creepy as hell. It's one of the best horror novels ever written. Oh my gosh.
So
I
that
had no business reading that at 14.
So that was it, brother. You just came in with the Clive Barker question. You out. Okay. Okay. All right.
Anybody
Other
else?
questions for Sean about his process, about his books, about the movies coming up?
You just raise your hand if you
yeah,
want to.
if you want to, and we'll.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you say you're when you're writing, you also like as you're writing the scenes, you picturing the scenes. Is it not to like kind of explain your mindset?
Oh, definitely. When I write, sometimes it feels like I'm going in a trance. It really does. I feel like I'm hallucinating because I do, and my wife can testify to that. That when I'm writing, if she's talking to me, I'm totally zoned out. I can. It's almost like I'm standing there and I'm just writing down what happens as it goes by. It's an intense feeling. I love it. I never get tired of it. I would write if I wasn't successful. I was writing when I wasn't successful. I got my first book I rejected 78 times. So, it's just it's just a feeling I can't describe. But yeah, I feel like I'm watching. You know what? It's almost like when you see a movie scene where you ever saw Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they're in the holodeck. It feels like I'm in the holodeck when I'm writing.
I love that.
Anybody else?
Sean, I have a question over here.
Yes.
So I noticed in both books, the main characters and then sometimes even the supporting characters, there'd be references to dysfunctional relationships with their mothers. Is there
Yeah.
something to that?
I love my mom, and she's passed on. But my mom was tough. She was tougher than a $2 steak, but she had to be. You know, she was raising two boys by herself in a wheelchair, so she had to be tough. But she had a very Seabrook wit. She asked me before she passed. She's like, "Am I the mom in Blacktop Wasteland?" And I was like, "No, not at all." I'll tell you a funny story about her because I loved her to death. She could be difficult sometimes, but she's also the reason I write.
Yeah.
When I was 13, I told her I want to be a writer, and she pawned her wedding ring to get me a computer. So, at the same time,
You know your ass was bad sometimes.
At the same time, my mom was somebody who could be very, very pointed in her conversations. I remember one time I was dating this young lady, and I was really into this young lady, and my mom was like, "Well, just remember, a new broom sweep clean." So, and I'm like, I'm 15. We're not getting married. But, I love my mom. And so I think, especially with Blacktop, it was a way of sort of a catharsis for me. Because it's also a very difficult situation with my dad. I had a very difficult situation with my dad. And I got to repair that. So I'm very happy my dad's still alive. And my dad he can't read very well, but he has all my books.
Oh, wonderful.
So.
Man, you have audiobooks, so that's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So.
You, in your relationships between the men in your books, are really strong. I've heard you and Walter Mosley talk about it.
Yeah.
We need that space in our crime fiction and literature. So your combinations of fathers and sons, though, the mother-son relationship was strong, but I was really moved by the father-son relationships, even when they were unhealthy or dysfunctional, at how they moved forward to a place of
I think that's important. I think we need to talk about those things. I think men are too often not. I won't say allowed. I don't think they can talk about those things, and so that's. I think there is such a thing as toxic masculinity, but I think tragic masculinity is true too. I think tragic masculinity is men's inability to open up to each other about the things that they feel.
So we talked about what's happening next. So Sean is really delighted to be here at Gaithersburg, but in a couple of weeks he'll be at Oxford. What you gonna be doing there?
It's a little further down the road. It's in August.
Okay.
But it's the Capital Crimes Festival in London, which is crazy. I just got back from LA. I was in New York the other night. I tell you, man, there are many times I can't believe where my writing is taking me. When I first started writing, I was working 60 hours a week at a hardware store. I used to drive up and down the East Coast with my friend Eric Pruitt, my road dog, with our books in the back of my broke down car trying to sell them. And now, like I said, people like Dennis Lehane not only blurred my book, but like my friend. Like, hit me up on email, like, oh, if you're in L.A., let me know. Or it's like, sir, I am so nervous around you. I could not even talk. It's incredible, like I said, we grew up so very poor, and my grandparents worked so hard just to provide the life that they had, and I never take it for granted. Another thing that my mom said, because she was full of homilies and colloquialism. She
I wonder
said,
where you got that from.
I know, right? She said, the shine wears off from new pennies real quick. I am determined to enjoy this because it's not always going to be like this. There's not, there's going to be another hot kid from the South one day. And so, I'm not going to be asked to be at all these events. So I'm going to enjoy it right now because it is, the best job ever. Isn't writing just the best job? It is just the best thing.
Sometimes.
Yeah. When it works well.
When you're working.
When it's not working, it's horrible. It's like I just want to throw my computer out the window. But when it's really humming, when it really works, it literally feels like you've raised your hand and the muses from Olympus are touching you.
Do your characters speak to you sometimes?
Sometimes they won't shut up. Sometimes they won't stop talking, and like I got other stuff to do. Like I gotta take the trash out. Can y'all wait? Oh my God! So like with that, I wrote something the other night. I wrote like 3 chapters in a burst. So like 28,000 words.
Wow.
And I thought I lost it, and I was losing my mind. Because there's the moment you can rewrite it, but it's never the same. It's never the same.
Yeah.
And so it's definitely, like I said, but writing has just changed my life. It really has. It just, I remember when my wife is sitting back there, and she owns her own business when we met, and when we're getting ready to get married, she's like, you should come work with me. It'll give you more time to write. And I was very nervous about that.
Yeah.
I was like, we need these 2 forms of income.
You got to tell her what the business is.
She owns a funeral home. And so she was like, come work with me, help me out around the funeral home, watch the hearse, whatever. It'll give you more time to write. And I said, but what if this doesn't work out?
Right.
And she was like, what if it does? And so my manager at the store, I worked at the hardware store, when I told him I was going to quit, I was going to write full time, he was like, oh, I don't know about that, and I don't know if that's going to work out. So then I left, and I found out from other people that worked there that he was talking about me as the year, because it was a couple years before stuff hit. Yeah. And like, I don't think Sean should have quit. He made a mistake and all this kind of stuff. So when Blacktop Wasteland came out, and it was on the NPR and the Amazon, and it won the Anthony and the McCavity and the Barry.
Did you say nah, 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 nah?
I took him a copy of the book, and I signed it. I said to Mike, I said, I don't think I'll be returning to my position. Best wishes, S.A. Cosby. And so, but on the other hand, it's like, it's just the greatest thing. If you could go back in time and tell 12-year-old Sean that, this kid who's kind of chubby, kind of nerdy, who has a bad temper, who gets in a lot of fights, who, works cutting grass and works at a farm helping kill hogs so he can have money to buy, Nike shoes because mom can't afford them. If you can tell him, hey, one day, Bradley Whitford, this real famous actor, is going to follow you on Twitter and want to be your best friend in a kind of creepy way. That Denzel Haynes and Walter Mosley are going to have your phone number.
That's right.
That, your book is going to be in your library. You never believe it. So.
Yeah. So, I've been given the 2-minute signal, and I can send praise to Sean for 2 minutes, or I can take one more question if anybody has one.
Anybody got one more question?
One more question. Don't be shy. Anybody?
You got a minute. There you go.
Anybody? Yes. That's a great question. Any formal writing training?
So I went to college for 2 years. I went to Chris Newport University for 2 years. My mom was already partially disabled, and then she had another situation. She had to drop out. And I remember saying this the other day on Twitter. I used to be embarrassed by that. I used to be embarrassed that I didn't have a college degree. And as of last week, now it's 22. 22 colleges have asked me to come speak to their students. As Stephen King said in one of his scarier books, "Life is a wheel," and so I'm not embarrassed by that anymore. I think it's just, that's no shade on MFA programs or anything like that.
Right.
I'm just privileged to do this. I couldn't think of doing anything else. Birds got to fly, bees got to sting, I got to write.
Will you all join me in thanking Sean?